Hey there guys, what's going on? Gale here. Welcome back to the YouTube channel once again for another Genshin Impact video, and today we are here to check out another tier list maker for Genshin Impact, but this time it's regarding the free constellations in the To Temper Thyself and Journey event coming up. I think that's the name. I could be wrong, but I think that's the name. And of course, we're gonna check out this tier list maker that I've already prepared in advance because I felt like it was gonna take way too long to go over each and every single character. To be quite honest, I did do a recording where I was trying to do that, and trust me when I say this, it was approaching 35 minutes. So I decided, you know what, I'm gonna prepare it all together, get it up and running, and we'll talk about it together, talk about why I put it in C tier, B tier, A tier, S tier, and I've got one specific spot reserved for an insane tier, one that you should go for if you are obviously keen on it. Now, this video, remember, is a very subjective video. Of course, if any of these characters are your main or a character that you use heavily, of course, prioritize that constellation. It's super important that you do so. But outside of that, of course, this is a very generic tier list. It's something that I've cooked up just based on me looking at the constellations, thinking about their value, and then just assigning them to a tier that I think suits them the most. Okay, so just keep that in mind, and of course in the comments let me know what you guys are planning on going for. Of course, remember that this event, right, it changes every season. So maybe in the next season, 12 weeks from now, or 2 months from, or 3 months, whatever it is, however many months from now, 2 patches from now, when the next season comes, they could add more characters as well. So that might change this tier list entirely as well. So keep that in mind. And the second thing to remember as well, and this is something from my side as well, is that I do believe that there is a good chance that in the future, I still feel like they will be introducing buffs for older characters. HSR has done it, Zenless has done it, and if there's one thing that these games are doing more and more of, is that they're picking stuff from each and every single one of their games, or their own in-house games, basically, right? Genshin's getting stuff from HSR's taking stuff from Genshin, Zenless is taking stuff from both as well. And so in my opinion, there's a very good chance that we could see buffs happening because both the other games have it already, right? So I do believe that that is a possibility, and that could change this tier list entirely as well. So keep that in mind when you're taking a look at this video, because this video, I don't know, maybe you guys might watch it 5-6 months down the line when they do have buffs, when there's a bunch of new characters in the, you know, roster to pick from. Things can change, right? So just keep that in mind when you're watching this video, okay? So without further ado, let's start off with the C tier first and foremost, because that is the no-fly zone. These are the constellations I feel like you shouldn't get, to be quite honest. I feel like they're the weakest. I feel like they're the most worthless constellations. Now, Chi-Chi is one where it's not really that she's just bad, it's just that Chi-Chi just doesn't have a position in any team, it feels like. Absolutely, you could probably try and use her in some composition, but I feel like no constellation adds more to her. Of course, C6 you could say helps a little bit because it gives her, you know, a revive and all that sort of jazz, but still, in my personal opinion, I feel like Chi-Chi's constellations, and especially because she's a standard unit, and you'll also see in B tier, I've done the same, I feel like the constellations for these for the standards are going to be a tier lower than where they should actually be potentially, right? So for me personally, I have to put Chi-Chi in C tier because of just the character she is, the fact that she's standard, and generally speaking, her constellations aren't necessarily all that impressive. Tartaglia faces a very common issue you're gonna see amongst a lot of these characters in terms of the 1.x characters, in that their constellations are generally quite weak, and Tartaglia embodies that the most out of all of them, because Tartaglia's constellations are atrocious, to be quite honest. I don't think there's a lot of value in any of Tartaglia's constellations, especially his early constellations are pretty rubbish. They kind of, you know, redeem themselves a little bit in C4 and C6, but even then they're only B tier, so I'm not gonna even go there. Shao C4, I mean, come on, fucking defense boost for 100% defense boost, great, that's awesome. Doesn't really matter too much anymore, to be quite honest, so I've put that at C tier as well. Eula, Kokomi, Ayato, Sino, Nilo, all of their constellations are helping them in a way that they don't need help in. For example, Nilo, crit rate, crit damage. She's a bloom character. they don't do crit rate, crit damage. That being said though, and this is a big, that being said though, if Lunar Bloom, which is coming up soon, is able to launch crit hits, which I don't think has been confirmed yet, if I'm not mistaken, from Llama's, preview that we've seen in the stream. I don't think it's been confirmed yet, but if it is able to crit potentially, there's a good chance that could go up. But for now, knowing what we know about Bloom, I do not want that anywhere near anywhere near me, to be quite honest. I don't think that should be required. Same thing with Kokomi. It helps with her damage. Does you really need it? No, not really. So yeah, I feel like the C tier is basically constellations that really don't help you in any way, shape, or form. And especially for me, in all honesty, it doesn't help me in any way, shape, or form, to be quite honest as well. I would say that the C tier constellations, if you're looking at it, 2, 6, 1, 4. Big shout outs to, by the way, Lintran for obviously doing it in a nice way where you can see the constellation number in the character. I think you should avoid the C tier entirely. Now we move over to B tier, which you guys can see is up top. We're not going to scroll up, otherwise you guys will get spoiled on the A tier. First and foremost, the Masterless Stella Fortuna is the first one on that list. And I've put that in B tier right now. And that's because we actually don't exactly know what it's going to do. The thing with Masterless Stella Fortuna is that, yes, we know it's going to increase our stats, attack, defense, and HP, but we don't know exactly in-game how that's going to affect our characters. A lot of people have done calculations. Big shout outs to like Flip on Twitter and various other people on Reddit and stuff for, trying to do the maths and figuring out what exactly is going to be the situation. A lot of people have suggested that Hyper Bloom is going to be the most benefited from this obviously boost to the stats, and it shows about a 20 to 30% team-wide buff basically. But in terms of the average buff you're getting across the board for other teams and other reactions and stuff, it's about a 5 to 10% average team-wide buff, or damage buff in particular. And so in that sort of situation, you're better off getting the constellations or weapons of characters. Now, it's obviously a free option you're getting if you can get it, of course, right here. But I feel like if you are using any of these other characters primarily, or generally you're looking at some of the A tier and S tier characters, you're going to see a lot more of a benefit there than getting a Masterless Stella Fortuna, especially because it's only going to give you one Stella Fortuna to level 95. Which means it's actually half the buff that I've mentioned already, right? So instead of 20 to 30%, it's 10% to 15%, or 2.5% to 5%, which isn't a significant amount. And obviously, along with the Masterless Stella Fortuna, as you can see right here, I'm going to just chuck her all the way down here so it's not lost in the sauce amongst the standard characters. But I put all the standard characters together here. Again, just primarily because of the fact that, well, in my personal opinion, I feel like the standard characters, while they are obviously very good, and some of them still have great potential. Jean, fantastic, of course, still in various compositions. Mona, really great as well. Diluc, with Plunge, Xianyun and all, amazing. Tainari, still solid Dendro. Keqing, great with Dendro, again. And then Daya, still solid. I wouldn't say she's insane, and I know a lot of people have issues with how she was designed and everything. She's still solid, especially as a pyro applicator and stuff like that. I think that with the constellations they're definitely B tier for me personally, because while some of their constellations are really good, like for example Jean C2 and stuff, I do think that generally speaking, because they're standard characters, because of the fact that you can get them from 50-50 losses and standard banner pulls, stuff like that, you're inevitably going to get these anyways, right? And so for me, I've just put them in B tier just because they're like, okay, they're there because you can pick them up. It's not a bad idea if you want to pick it up, but I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way and recommend it. And that's what this tier is. This B tier is pretty much just that. A lot of these are the same thing basically, and they're very minor boosts. For me, the thing is with constellations, right? What I appreciate about constellations the most, I mean, we'll take a look at Baiju's, for example, in terms of his C2, which I put in B tier, of course, right? The thing I like about other constellations, and the constellations I've put in A tier, S tier, and above, is that they blend well with the rest of the characters' kits, and also they mesh well and they take the best of all the constellations or future constellations or previous constellations and make them really darn useful, right? With, for example, Baiju's C2, right? when your character attacks or hits a nearby opponent with their attacks, Baiju will unleash a splice, right? A Gossamer Sprite Splice. It'll initiate one attack before returning, dealing 250% of Baiju's attack as dendro damage and healing for 20% of Universal Diagnosis Gossamer Sprite's normal healing. Great, cool, good damage. Do you need it? Not really. No, it's not something I would say it's out of the way, you know, and is amazing. So for me personally, I put it up there. Baiju C6, great, increases damage dealt by 8% of Baiju's max HP. Again, I'm like, do we need that for Baiju? Whereas I would have preferred more support, maybe some form of Dendro Res Shred or something like that. That's what I mean. Something that blends well with what Baiju himself is supposed to be. This is the one thing, obviously, I hated about Kokomi, for example, is that it's trying to go in a direction that it doesn't work for that much. You could make it work. With a lot of effort, you can make it work, but is it worth it? No. Great for mains, I suppose, in that sense, but in terms of the value from me personally, not so much, you know, in that sense. So you'll see along here, there's a lot of like stuff like that. I think obviously with Yay, it's like, I think it's about like you get like a couple of energy per particle, if I'm not mistaken. I think at C1, if I'm not wrong, I think it's something like that at C1. Things like that, do you really need it, especially the teams that she's on? I mean, seriously, like, no, not really, and especially with what they're doing. I will say, I feel like in some cases I am being a bit harsh, like for example, Ye's C2. A part of me is thinking about putting it in A tier because I'm like, you know, attack range really helps out, actually super useful, especially in game modes like Imaginarium Theater and stuff. But I still feel like it's missing that little bit, to be honest. You know, it feels like it's missing a little bit somewhere, somehow, you know, in my personal opinion. But yeah. Again, I just wanted to point out one or two because I don't want this video to be too long. These are my opinions and my thoughts on where I think some of these characters should end up being. You guys can let me know whether you disagree or agree with me, and then we can have a discussion in the comments section, alright? But yeah, that's just where I wanted to place these guys, right? I wanted to place them here because I felt like they deserve to be there. Wanderer, by the way, that's C2. This one is C2. I think our boy may have forgotten that he did C1 already and did this extra C1 there. Alas, that's fine, all well and good, but yeah, I just feel like that would be the one thing I would point out. Again, I would say that I've kind of also tried to make sure by doing this B tier, maybe I should have had an extra tier, to be honest, maybe a D tier, a C tier, B tier, A tier, S tier, because I feel like there's a lot of characters I've just chucked into B tier, and maybe I could split up the standard characters a little bit more, but I feel like for the most part, B tier is where it's like, it's not a bad pickup if it's the only options you have, better than C tier, basically. You know, you can go for anything here. It's not like you're gonna lose out, you're gonna gain something. It's still a positive. It's just value-wise, are you getting something crazy out of it? Maybe not really, but still, it's there as an option. Now we move on to A tier, which I actually have quite a lot. Okay, you guys have already seen S tier. We'll put S tier right there and we'll talk about it together, okay? So this is my A tier and S tier. Now, A tier, I first and foremost want to say all the extra charge ones, like for example, Ganyu C2, Xiao C1, Baiju C1, Shenhe C1, right? Anything that gives extra charge, I decided to move it from B tier to A tier. I initially had it in B tier, and I'll be honest and say the reason why I had it in B tier is I felt initially, this was my mindset thinking about it initially, was that I felt like, well, it's an extra charge. Yes, it'll help with energy recharge, gives you an extra, you know, go at the elemental skill, gives you a little bit more flexibility, but I felt like it's not doing anything extra, and in my mind I was like, oh, it needs to do extra to be a part of this A tier. But now that I'm looking back on it, it is doing technically a lot, because it's just an extra use in an elemental skill. It basically is a free cooldown, right? It's effectively resetting your cooldown on your elemental skill, kind of, in a way. It also, obviously, like I've mentioned earlier, you know, when I was talking about synergizing with the rest of your kit, having an extra charge synergizes with the rest of your kit to another level, obviously, right? And not only that, with certain characters, like for example Ganyu and her C6 and C4, it will blend extremely well especially because of the Frostflake charge not being required when you use your elemental skill. You being able to do that again because you have 2 of those charges, right? So that's where I kind of was like, okay, maybe I should push it up a little bit more, you know? Maybe I should give the charges a bit more appreciation there, and that's why I boosted them up to A tier. Now, obviously, the rest of the other A tier ones pretty much are like super useful in my personal opinion, you know, be it that they obviously, like for example what I said with Ganyu, you know, giving the extra using the elemental skill would give you basically a no charge shot on you know, her charged attack. Basically you don't have to charge for it, with Albedo helping out with stuff like, you know, basically giving you extra damage and defense and so on and so forth. It's just all very useful stuff, pretty much. These are all very useful stuff. Like Yaimiko will go back to her C4 and C6, defense shred, elemental damage bonus. I think these are all very useful things, and this is what I wanted the A tier to be. These are the tiers. This is the tier where it's all about just how can you help the team as a whole rather than just helping yourself. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want you to be the main damage dealer in this scenario unless you are a damage dealer like Ganyu or Hu Tao or Klee herself, right? With the A, with Xiao, with Baiju, so on and so forth. This tier is all about you do what you're supposed to do really well. And that's the whole point of this tier. And that's what I want to do. Like, if you go for anything in this tier, thumbs up, you're absolutely fine. Nilo C1, Shenhe's C1. I wouldn't blame any of you guys for going for these. In fact, these might be the ones I go for, to be quite honest. And then in the S tier and in the insane tier, I've reserved it for 5 characters. Hu Tao C1, I mean, it's a no-brainer. It just enables her to another level. There's a huge difference in playing Hu Tao without C0 or with C0 and with C1, you know, and I am one of those players who played without the C1, and I hate using her. But with the C1, I might end up enjoy using her, and that's the big difference. Shenhe and Nilo's C2 are obviously super helpful. I mean, Nilo's C2 gives her Dendro Res Shred, as well as, of course, Hydro Res Shred, if I'm not mistaken. I remember it's both, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's both, quite literally, right? And then you obviously have Shenhe's, which also gives Cryo damage as well and stuff, or Cryo Res Shred, I think it is. These are super useful. These are very useful constellations, and in my opinion, they deserve to be up there. Ganyu C1, if I'm not mistaken as well, is literally just a huge help towards her damage, and her Frostflake arrow basically gets to reduce the opponent's cryo res. Yeah, exactly, and gives her energy res, and also along with that gives her energy regen, but also it doesn't even need to hit the target, which is fantastic in my opinion. So the value of these constellations are so immense in my opinion that in my opinion you prioritize the insane and S tier ones. A tier is the one I would go for next, and then B tier, and then C tier, as I would say. C tier you should just avoid, in my personal opinion. You're better off going for the Masterless Stella Fortuna in that situation. In my personal opinion, it's worthless, because remember, for C6 it's only if you're at C5 basically, right? If you're going from C4 to C6, that's another thing to discuss as well, because in my opinion you should only go for the C6 ones if you are at C5, which in my opinion you could argue and say that drops down the C6's a tier, because realistically you're not going to stop at C5, right? I mean, I'm sorry, you're not stopping at C5 necessarily, so just keep that in mind. And you could argue the same for C4 and so on and so forth, but this is assuming you are. We're gonna just put these characters back in there, and we can talk about that. But that's another thing to keep in mind, is that when you are looking at C4 and C6, technically you're also factoring in the fact that you are at C3 or C5, which is unlikely. So you're going from C2 to C3 and then C3 to C4, which you can't necessarily do as well. Come on to that in a second. But still, is it worth 2 constellations? No, I wouldn't say so. So that, in my opinion, drops it down a tier. I'll do that in a second. We'll probably end up doing that. But The other thing is you can't do that, right? You only get one constellation per character. Now I'm hoping they reset that at some point, maybe next year and the next anniversary. It's a full fresh reset. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But I wish even if you could get multiple characters constellations in one go, unless they're your main, would I recommend it? No, I wouldn't. Absolutely not. It's just not worth it. Going from C3 or C2 to C4 to constellations, no, you're better off going for other characters, in my opinion. The main ones that are going to be super valuable, in my personal opinion, are your C1s and C2s. That is where you're going to get the bang for your buck, basically, for what you're getting. I mean, it's free, so it's anyways, all of it is bang for your buck in general. But yeah, you know what I mean, right? But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm curious to see what you guys have to say. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know your thoughts. Where would you rank all of these things? I'm going to leave a link in the description for you to do your own tier list as well. And of course, let me know who you guys are picking up. Right now, for me, I think I have to go for Hu Tao, Ganyu, Shenhe, and Nilo is my guess. I'm thinking about Ayaka, but I think it's going to be those four, to be quite honest. It also is a good spread of elements as well. Well, 2 cryo units with Shenhe and Ganyu, but I think it's still not bad. I think it's still not bad. Maybe I might go for Kokomi instead of Ganyu, maybe. We'll see, because I have a lot of cryo DPS characters anyways, so it's not really required for me to go for Ganyu, because I've got Skirk, I've got Ayaka, I've got Ganyu, I've got Rio Thesli. I just have too many, so maybe I might not. But let me know what you guys are going for. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, take it easy, everybody. Bye-bye.